Well, it's the episode we've all been waiting for. It's time to get all of your hate and anger out because it's time to talk George Springer.
You are Locked On Blue Jays, your daily Toronto Blue Jays podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jays. Thank you for making Locked On Blue Jays your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. As always, I'm Braden Iwasko. He's Carter First. You can find us on Twitter, Braden5Iwasko. Carter First, too, as well on Instagram and TikTok at Locked On Blue Jays. If you're new here to YouTube or you're listening anywhere else, make sure you head over to the YouTube page, drop a subscription. It really does help us out. Keeps you guys up to date on all your Blue Jays information. And we sort of made YouTube the hub where you can get your videos, podcasts, shorts, live streams, if we ever get any moves happening. Also, Discord link is in the description. So if you guys want to come talk Blue Jays with us any time of day, make sure you do that. Carter, it is the day. We will get into whatever George Springer was last season in a couple minutes. But before we get into all of that, a little bit of an update here on the Santander, signing. What's going to happen? Where is he going to go? Apparently, he's close to making a decision. Again, take all of this with a grain of salt. I don't know how close Santander is to making a decision, but that's the report anyway. Do you see it happening sometime soon, Carter, or do you think this is still going to drag out a little bit longer?
I don't think Santander is going to want to go into February and start getting closer and closer to that spring training because he's seen how that has planned out for a lot of different players. With Santander, the things that we keep seeing is the Angels are in, the Red Sox are in, and the Toronto Blue Jays apparently are emerging as front runners for Anthony Santander, but we have seen that song and dance before this offseason. So I am not taking anything with any validity until I see whether it's John Hyman, maybe it's Bob Nightingale, Ben Nicholson-Smith, one of these people that come out and say that Anthony Santander is officially a Toronto Blue Jay, because we need this guy more than ever. We need a corner outfielder desperately, especially as we'll go into this segment. We'll go into this episode with the George Springer and just the overall Toronto Blue Jays outfield going into 2025.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happens. Again, that's sort of what we've been at this whole offseason is, we'll just have to wait and see what happens. I feel like I'm like a broken clock just saying the same thing over and over again. But it's how this offseason has went. Let's start it. Let's get into it. Let's talk about it. And we were going to have to talk about it at some point. George Springer. He wasn't good. It pained me to watch him stay in that leadoff position all season. We saw the rise a little bit and we thought, oh, maybe. And then, no, never mind. No, he's just bad. And he has been terrible. The contract has looked bad. And now with Daulton Varsho being out as well, the worry of what George Springer can do to this team moving forward is front of mind. And I am very concerned, Carter.
It's just been a steady decline, unfortunately, for George Springer and the Toronto Blue Jays. 2021, George Springer was the George Springer that we've seen, the World Series MVP, the Houston Astros frontrunner leading this team to World Series appearances and deep playoff runs. 2022, a little bit worse, still pretty good for George Springer. 2023, you thought might be the worst that you get from George Springer, but then we got 2024, which was a whole new monster. So obviously George Springer, the biggest contract in Toronto Blue Jays history, not looking too good heading into those final 2 years. It was in January 2021, so this is why we have a little bit of faith for the Santander stuff, this Bregman stuff, because he did sign in January of 2021, World Series MVP George Springer, 6 years, $150 million, passes Vernon Wells' contract of 7 years, $126 million as the highest contract in Toronto Blue Jays history. Bringing up Vernon Wells, I kind of wanted to, this is going to be a little bit of a negative episode, unfortunately, because you saw what happened for George Springer in 2024. Vernon Wells' contract, again, it was 2007 to 2011. I was 5 years old. 2011, I was 9 years old. So I was watching the Toronto Blue Jays, obviously not taking it all in like I am right now. I was just watching, my baseball team just play in those years, Doc Holliday, those kind of guys. A lot of good memories from that, but Vernon Wells, unfortunately, not one of them. Vernon Wells' contract was not viewed kindly by Toronto Blue Jays fans. It was actually viewed as one of the worst in baseball at that time. During his 4 years, the Jays, he slashed .267 with a .321 on base, 450 slugging. Those 4 inconsistent years. Let's look at what George Springer has done in those 4 years, the Toronto Blue Jays. George Springer's slash line of 251, 328 on base, 466 or 436 slugging. So you're comparing it. You look at the Vernon Wells, 267 average, George Springer 251 average. You look at on base, Vernon Wells had 321 average, George Springer had a 328 average. You look at slugging, Vernon Wells had a 450 average, George Springer has a 436 average. Very similar statistics here. Not exactly what you're looking for the largest contract in Toronto Blue Jays history. And at that point, Vernon Wells, again, like you look at 7 years, 126 million at that point, 2007 through 2011. The contract's not nearly going as high as they are right now. You didn't see a $765 million contract being paid out in the year of 2011. $25 million is $25 million, though. That is not chump change. That is a big contract. It is the biggest contract in Toronto Blue Jays history. So when we were looking at George Springer and we're looking at this production right now, we were hoping that maybe 2021 they made a run, 2022 they made a run, 2023 they made a run. It'd be a lot easier to have more fond memories of George Springer if this team did have a lot more success. But I'm going to throw it back over to you just for some Vernon Wells comments and then obviously going into the stats after.
Yeah, it's funny how history sort of repeats itself with Toronto Blue Jays and the fan base, the organization, everything. And these big contracts tend to bite us. And it's not fun. It's just really not ideal. And George Springer, Carter, you're right in saying that if it would have gone better in 2021, 2022, 2023, then it's acceptable. Then it's like, whatever. We got what we needed out of George Springer. But the problem is now George Springer is still looked at to be a major player on this team, is one of what they hope to be your top 3 guys, which is a big issue. You were hoping at this time you'd be able to ride George Springer out, put him in the field. He'd be hitting bottom in the order, and that would be it. But now we're in a situation where we need to rely on a bounce-back season from a guy who's been steadily declining. And this just does not add up to a successful baseball team. And I know I hate to harp on it and always bring it back to the bad, but this episode, if you're a Blue Jays fan, this episode is going to be mostly negative because this was a very poor season from George Springer. Like, I go over his WARs, Carter. It was by far his worst season with a WAR with a 1.1. The season before in 2023, a 2.1. And then, he had the 4.1 stacked in there when he got when he was nominated as an all-star. But you saw the decline coming. And I would have been able to accept it a lot more if this team was built around those 3 more heavily, about him, Bo, and Vlad. But that's not what we got. And now we're in a position where, of course, we're going to look at this contract poorly because the team had no success. The front office did not do enough when George Springer and Bo Bichette and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. were all playing well. And again, we have not gotten a full season where the 3 of those guys have all played well together. And that's a huge problem. That's called missed opportunity. When your 3 best players don't play as their best together, or at what you expect to be your best with a aging George Springer and an aging contract. So no, the George Springer contract is not looking good right now. He's steadily declining, and I'm looking over his baseball savant, Carter, and we were talking about George Springer like we need him to be, a top 3 player on this team, but you look at his statistics. I look through baseball savant, and he's the epitome of a mid player, Carter. He is just straight up mid. He's okay at best. And that is not what you want out of a guy that has the biggest contract in Blue Jays history. His slugging, 52nd percentile. His average exit velocity, 20th percentile. His barrel percentage, 63rd percentile. His hard hit percentage, 34. Sweet spot, 6. Bat speed, 52. Squared up, 55. His chase rate, actually good, 82nd percentile. His whiff rate, 44th percentile. His Ks and walks, both close to 70th percentile. And so when you're talking about George Springer from the batting perspective, he's a mid player who doesn't get on base or doesn't have the best average hitting in your 1 spot. I don't know how many times we have to go back and forth and me bring this up. Your 1-hole hitter should be the guy that gets on base and has a great average. That isn't George Springer. So why in the world is he still hitting number one for this team? It blows my mind.
George Springer's never necessarily been an average guy, but he is one of the best to ever do it from the leadoff spot. I believe he's second now in MLB history in leadoff home runs. George Springer is one of the best leadoff hitters to ever do it. And you talked about George Springer being a mid-baseball player. George Springer wasn't even a mid-baseball player in 2024. I would have loved if George Springer was a league average baseball player in 2024. We're talking about a guy that was one of the worst hitters among all qualified hitters in 2024. We saw his first game of the season. George Springer had 2 home runs in March in the first game. Like, okay, maybe we got a little bit of a George Springer resurgence here. Going into his age 34 season, I aren't expecting a whole lot. We're expecting the prime George Springer. What we're expecting him to be a league average hitter. We're expecting him to probably hold on to that leadoff spot for the entirety of the season. But then you go looking in, he plays through April, as he plays through May. This guy was bottom 3 in all qualified hitters in OPS. It was his at-bats absolutely unserious. Just had no faith whatsoever in this leadoff spot, and it got compounded so much worse because John Schneider just refused to move this guy from the leadoff spot. We said at the end of April, George Springer clearly is not producing right now. Maybe he does get back there. You can throw him back in the leadoff spot. Right now, it is not working whatsoever, and that was when Bichette was struggling as well. The top of this order, you had George Springer, bottom 3 hitter in all of baseball. Bichette, not quite a bottom 3 hitter, but not a very good hitter whatsoever. Probably a bottom 25 hitter in all of baseball at that time. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. was doing Vladimir Guerrero Jr. things, but usually you can't have one player carry an entire organization unless you have Aaron Judge hitting 65 home runs for your New York Yankees. But just going into some other stats as well, the kind of what saved him a little bit for this season and what made his numbers look even half decent is that near the end of May, John Schneider finally gives in, moves him away from that leadoff spot. He goes on a little bit of a run, hitting 250. Again, not exactly what you want, but it's George Springer. He's not going to go out and hit 300. It's just not who George Springer is. But he had an OPS of 797 with 8 home runs, 9 doubles, and that was from around the middle or the end of May to the All-Star break. And then at that point, we're like, okay, maybe George Springer found some stuff. Maybe he just had a really bad first 2 months of the season. Maybe he could turn it around post All-Star break. We look at what he did post All-Star break. I mean, the guy hit 213 with a 661 OPS. That's not going to play for a guy that you're paying $25 million. And that was in his third last year of his contract. We still have 2 more years of George Springer that we're going to have to handle. And now we're going to have to talk about this in the second segment. But Daulton Varsho not going to be ready opening day. That means George Springer is going to have to go back to center field. When he was playing center field in 2021, played just over 70 games. Are we going to have an injured George Springer when you already have no depth in our outfield? Again, you got to hope they're going to make a signing. We'll get into this more in the second segment. Things might not be looking too good for the outfield for the Toronto Blue Jays this upcoming season.
Yeah, let's take a quick break because we got to dive into it because we thought it looked bad before with this Toronto Blue Jays team. Well, get ready because this one's going to knock your socks off. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. FanDuel, I always tell you guys, the way that you can bet, they have so many ways to place bets. It is my favorite place to do so. I like the live games where I can go in, see who's doing well, see who isn't doing well. That I can determine, where I want to place my money for the day. Right now, new customers could finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. I'm telling you guys, bonus bets are free money. Go put your $5 on something easy that you know is going to win. Get those bonus bets and have some fun. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Carter, we got to talk about it. What will this outfield look like opening day? Daulton Varsho will not be ready. Who does that leave us with? Loperfido, Davis Schneider, George Springer. Yikes, dude.
Yeah, that doesn't necessarily scream excitement from the Toronto Blue Jays fan base. When you got a guy that hasn't really played MLB games, Davis Schneider, not even a left fielder, natural position as a second baseman, did play good baseball at left field, but you have to be relying on a Davis Schneider bounce back. You can kind of get away with one guy not being the greatest outfield of all time, not having the best offensive statistics of all time. But when you have George Springer as one of your guys, you have Joey Loperfido, who just hasn't proven it at the major league level, and you have Davis Schneider coming off of his worst season at the major league level as well. It's not something that a lot of people are going to get excited for. We always talk about the possibility of adding a corner outfielder. We started off this episode by the Toronto Blue Jays being a front runner for Santander. That definitely helps out. When Daulton Varsho comes back, obviously can really take over that center field position. But to start the season, if you start the season and you're 10, 15 games under 500, that is a very tough hole to climb out of. It seemed like that's what we were doing for the entirety of the start of the last season. That we're just trying to battle back to that 500. You go 6 games back, then you go back up to 3 games back, then you go down to 7, and you never quite could get back to that 500 mark. And I just wanted to also throw this in, which this is George Springer in the leadoff spot last season. So George Springer, 101 games, 407 plate appearances, 87 hits, 12 home runs, 33 RBIs, 85 strikeouts to 41 walks, slash line of 214. You had your leadoff hitter was hitting 214 with a 291 on base percentage, a 349 slugging with an OPS of 640. This was George Springer's lowest average of his career, lowest on base of his career, lowest slugging of his career, lowest WAR of any season. And it was even worse than in 2020. When George Springer played 51 games in 2020 and had a better WAR than he did in 2024. It's absolutely insane. First time under a league average hitter, worst batting average in balls in play, worst home run percentage. The list goes on and on and on for George Springer with some of his career worst. And we talked about the steady decline. I don't know if it's going to get any better for George Springer. This guy is 35 years old and he's going to have to play center field for a guy that, again, defensively wasn't necessarily bad. For a guy that can't even hit offensively, you're going to give him more responsibility in playing center field. I don't necessarily think that's a recipe for success, but that's kind of where the cards are being dealt for George Springer.
Yeah, dude, this sucks, but it's something that this management team had to understand. You see how bad he is. There has not been an outfield signing yet, which we said from day one of the offseason that that's what needs to happen. There wasn't one. So now you're staring at this point another lost season in the face, having George Springer man center field on a guy who can't hit. He can't be in the leadoff spot. He's getting up there in age. Everything is looking terrible for George Springer. But this is the hand we're dealt. So I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. Maybe it's going to have to come in an off-season signing here. It has to. It has to. Otherwise, I don't know. I don't know how we get through the first 10, 15, 20 games of the season. I can't see us being over 500 in those first, for the whole season, but then also for the first 20 games of the year.
It's going to be interesting to see how George Springer responds to the career worst season that he's ever had. This guy's 35 years old. Where I'm at with George Springer, obviously don't want him leading off. I think that is almost universal among Toronto Blue Jays fans. You cannot lead off George Springer for 2025. And that poses the question, who does lead off if it's not George Springer? Andrus Gimenez, Will Wagner, who again looks like he can be good, but hasn't played a lot of games. That's a lot of pressure on a guy that's played 30 games at the MLB level. And what we're seeing, I think Santander's not a leadoff hitter if we get him. You get any sort of corner outfielder, you're probably not leading him off. I think what's going to happen is George Springer is going to be the leadoff hitter again for this Toronto Blue Jays team in 2025. And I just wanted to ask you this. Can it get any worse for George Springer? Do you think in 2025, can he get even worse than what he did in 2024? Is that even a possibility?
I want to say no, I really do. But yeah, probably at this point, I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if George Springer fell off an absolute cliff this season and this team is just terrible. But again, he can also have a bounce back. I think that's a possibility. Is it likely? No, but you have to believe at some point that this front office and this organization somewhat knows what they're doing. And the only thing that will prove that to me isn't George Springer, is if they can make that offseason signing. Because if that doesn't happen, then I think this all doesn't matter anyway. I think it's all just hearsay. Nobody could tell me that the Toronto Blue Jays are going to be okay. But again, we'll have to wait and see. Carter, I know we still have to hit our player grades for George Springer. A couple other things we wanted to get into here. I don't know, my guy. I'm very torn because again, I'm a person that I don't like hating on my favorite team. I don't want to prey on anybody's downfall. And you look at the career that George Springer has had, and it is an exceptional one. It is a fantastic career. But now it's affecting the team that we love. And it's hard to not be a little upset. And maybe it's this shouldn't be directed at George Springer. Maybe this should be more directed at the front office and the management team not moving him from that leadoff spot. Because I think George Springer can be a serviceable, low in your lineup player that gives you fine defense. Again, not great. I think everybody inflates how good George Springer's defense is. I know me and you've had that conversation. I'll actually go over quickly just his defensive statistics here a little bit. just for Baseball Savant, it's going to show you his range, 50th percentile. He's fine, I guess. And then his arm value, 3rd percentile, 3rd, 3, the number 3. It's terrible. And his arm strength is the 65 percentile. It's not good. And you're going from Daulton Varsho being able to cover 70% of the field to George Springer, who's fine, Joey Loperfido, which I don't honestly know what to think about his defense, and then
he's
David
good defensively.
Schneider.
I'm not worried about Joey Loperfido defensively.
Well, okay, but and then David Schneider, who's also okay. He's going to make some good plays. He's going to make some bad plays. I'm actually all right with him there. But to have 3 guys that I'm okay with having out there, and 3 guys whose bats I'm a little bit questionable about, or not a little bit questionable, very questionable about, that scares the hell out of me, Carter.
Well, just to continue on with the defense, had 2 errors in right field, 3 outfield assists. So that's kind of where the arm value goes. Not the worst arm strength of all time, but George Springer was not a very accurate thrower from the outfield this season. You would expect him to have a lot more outfield assists. You could just by the eye test for George Springer. A lot of times throwing the ball up the line, throwing the ball obviously behind home plate, kind of towards that first baseline. So not exactly what you're looking for. I don't mind George Springer in right field. He's not a bad defender by any means. I would still say he's an above average defender. But if you move this guy to center field, he had all those injury troubles in 2021 when this guy was playing center field. The whole reason you moved him away from center field was because you didn't want him to have to move as much. You didn't want to have to rely on his defensive game. The plan was to help his offensive categories a little bit more and maybe keep him stable for a little bit longer. I asked you if George Springer could get any worse. I'm going to try to talk myself into this. I'm going to create a spin zone. George Springer is going to be a slightly above average league hitter in 2025. I think it can't get any worse. He had 19 home runs. I'm assuming that can go up a little bit more. The only issue is I think he's going to start slow at the start of the season because he has all that more responsibility in center field. And even if you do sign a guy like Santander, you go and get your corner outfielder. All it takes is one injury, and you're in the exact same boat that you were just in. The Toronto Blue Jays were fairly lucky with injuries last year. Obviously, Bichette, not exactly what you wanted, Jordan Romano. But those are really the only 2 major injuries that you did have. You had Erik Swanson out, kind of just, struggled with, obviously, performance issues, different things like that. But the Toronto Blue Jays, for the most part, fairly lucky with their injuries last season. Obviously, Alek Manoah is another one that we can throw in there. But you got to expect that baseball happens. Things happen on the baseball field. There are going to be some injuries for all players on the Toronto Blue Jays, or at least a few of them. I shouldn't say all players. But now you got George Springer, who's 35 years old, playing center field. This guy from the eye test, as we saw last year, diving all over the place. The more you dive, the more you have a chance to get some injuries, whether it's even just like a bone bruise. Again, bumps and bruises. Players play through that. But when you have George Springer coming off his worst career season and you're giving him more and more responsibility, especially if you're going to keep him in the leadoff spot, that's a lot to ask for from 35-year-old George Springer that just came off his worst season.
Yeah, and it's not fair to him. It really isn't. And as much as we complain about George Springer, we understand the tough position that he's put in at, like you said, age 35 season. That's a tough thing to do for a veteran player to go out there and try to be a top performer on this team. And now we're putting, you're right, more responsibility on him. I don't know. I got to question what's going on here. We have been. We have been. Let us know what you guys think about George Springer as well. We want to hear it because we've heard it on videos that weren't even about George Springer. So you might as well let us hear it now of what you guys think about him, what you think this management team should do with him. We understand. I mean, everybody, I think, understands that a trade would be great if you could get his contract off the books. Maybe, flip him for something, make another trade. But right now, with the hand you're dealt, how do you feel? What can they do with this outfield? Carter, let's go into the season grade for George Springer, expectations versus what he was. Where do you put him at?
I think this might be the first time I'm doing this with all of our player grades. It has to be an F. This guy was one of the worst hitters in all of baseball. When you're paying a guy $25 million, you're playing a former World Series MVP this amount of money. You expect, again, with the age, he's going to decline a little bit, but he absolutely fell off a cliff in 2024. Again, I'm hoping he can be slightly above league average. If he can have a 105 WRC plus, 105 OPS plus, I'd be more than happy with that at this point. From what I saw from George Springer in 2024, it has to be an F.
Yeah, I'm there with you. I don't think that this was a question, to be honest. I think me and you going into this episode knew that, the F was plastered all over the walls here. because George Springer was just horrendous. And we have spent the past year complaining about him and different things about his game, the management team around him, how they feel about George Springer. We've been calling for heads about George Springer, and we haven't really seen anything happen. There hasn't been a statement. We don't know. Again, we'll have to see how the opening day roster shakes out, if he's hitting number one, if he's center field. That all can change. It all can change. Something could happen where they like this guy better there, but I just don't see a whole lot of change coming for this team, Carter. I really do hope that we get a signing, some information, something like that. But you know what? We'll continue to talk about it, to cover it. We hope that you guys leave us some comments. We're probably gonna have a good laugh at some of them off the podcast, Carter. Anything else about George Springer before we sort of take a quick break? I know you have something you want to get into. Just I think from Monday's episode, if I'm not wrong. Are you good there? Do you got anything else on Springer?
I'll get one more thing with George Springer. Obviously, with the leadoff spot, with all the responsibility that he is going to have, I think what we might have to do is you might have to pull a Philadelphia Phillies. You might have to throw Vladimir Guerrero Jr. as your leadoff hitter. Put your best hitter, give him the most at-bats. Again, he's probably going to hit a lot of home runs, and he might not do that with a lot of people on base, but I'd much rather see Vladimir Guerrero Jr. get that 5 at-bats and have George Springer hit, whether it's 5, whether it's 6, whether it's 7. At some point in our order, we got to switch something up with George Springer. But George Springer is going to be one of those guys that if the Toronto Blue Jays are going to flip the script and have a good season in 2025, that he's going to be an integral piece of that. He's going to have to play a good center field defense. He's going to have to be a way better hitter than he was last season. Among guys like Alejandro, Kirk's going to have a better season. Daulton Varsho, when he comes back, I'm not exactly high on him because he's going to miss the start of, obviously, the next season. But he's going to be one of the major pieces. If this team wants to have a bounce back, it's going to run through George Springer.
We've talked about this the past few episodes, Carter. Everything has to align for this team to do well. Their best players need to be their best players. I don't know how many times I've said that. But their best players do have to be their best players. You need guys that you didn't expect to have great years to be great. You need your pitchers to be fantastic. Guys that, Alek Manoah, you need him to come back guns blazing. You need Bowden Francis to continue on his torrid pace from the end of last season. There's a lot of things that have to go right for this team. You need the bullpen to wake up and be somewhat coherent. I don't know. There's a lot of what ifs with this team, and that's a big issue. And we'll continue to talk about it next week. This week, Carter, wow, has it been just an absolute slugfest for negativity, eh?
It's tough to be positive, but we were going to try to leave the negativity in 2024. That lasted one day, if that. But we'll try to be positive. It's going to be a lot easier to, spin zone some things and kind of get behind the guys on the Toronto Blue Jays when the rosters are finalized. Right now, there still is a lot of incentive to go out and sign some of these free agents, make this team better. But at the end of the day, if we're fans of the Toronto Blue Jays, we don't want them to be bad, obviously. No, so once we get to February, once we get to March, we're going to be advocating for some of our guys. There still is hope until you get to that regular season, and then things are going to happen. Whether it goes good, whether it's going to go bad, we're going to be watching anyway, and I'm sure you guys are going to be watching as well. So we got a little bit more to get into in this third segment. We'll catch you with that after this short break.
Today's episode brought to you by Game Time. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, comedy. I'm a big comedy guy too. Music, comedy, obviously sports. So one of my favorite memories, I attended a concert actually last year, one this year, a ton of them. It was an absolute blast, and I got tickets at a great price, and that's sort of what I'm looking for when I go to concerts. The energy, the excitement, everything, it was unforgettable. It's one of the best times. Even when I go to different sporting events and you get a good deal on tickets, it makes everything a little bit easier because you can have an extra pop. You can have an extra, some extra popcorn, extra food, whatever you want to do. It frees up a little bit of that. So Game Time really does help out with that. Now Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you the only the incredible deals on great seats. So you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, I know, Carter, we got a ton of comments on Monday's episode. A couple things I know you wanted to clear up, talk about. Why don't you hit us with those? Because I know exactly which one you're talking about, and I'm ready for it.
Yeah, we got multiple comments that when we talked about this on multiple podcasts in the last couple of weeks. We talked about how Ed Rogers, out of all the owners in the MLB, has the second highest net worth in the league. And a lot of comments were saying Ed Rogers doesn't make the decisions. Ed Rogers isn't the one handing out the checks. Ed Rogers, blah, 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 blah. And you guys are right. The people that commented that, they are right, but that's not exactly what we were going for when we were bringing this up. The kind of direction that we were going for is that Rogers has a lot of money. Rogers is one of the most highest ownership groups in all of baseball in terms of monetary value, in terms of just assets that they have with this organization. So when you have an owner that has the second highest net worth in all of baseball, you would assume that this ownership group can come together and they should be able to negotiate with some of these contracts. They should be able to fork over these massive contracts. They should be in the top 5 in payroll in a lot of these different situations. We know that Ed Rogers isn't the one. He's the dictator. He's not saying, oh, I need this guy, and this guy. Obviously, there is different people aiding in these decisions. But when you have this much wealth within an organization, you would think they'd be able to sign multiple free agents that will help this team win in 2025.
Yeah, it wasn't about who's who and who wants to spend and who doesn't. It was about this team. If you want to be in on big name guys, you have to be willing to spend the money and spend the money in correct places. That's more so the takeaway of this. Not oh, we want to argue about the this and that. We just want somebody to spend the money correctly. We know this team spends money. But I said this in I think it was the last video, Carter, on Wednesday. It's not about how much you spend. It's about where you spend it and how you spend it. This team is evidently spending money wrong. You can't give Kevin Kiermaier $10.5 million. I don't know who in their right mind decided to pull the trigger on that one, but yikes. As much as I love Kevin Kiermaier, I mean, great guy, great place in the city of Toronto, but $10.5 million is crazy. So you want to argue over this and that in the comments. Again, we understand your point. We understand, whatever. It's more so just about get out there and spend money correctly. I'm not the guy. I'll tell you that for free right now. I probably wouldn't make those great decisions either. But somebody has to. It's their job. I talk about it on a podcast. I'm not the one pulling the trigger on these things.
No, absolutely. We just want the best for our Toronto Blue Jays. And honestly, this money conversations probably wouldn't be happening a whole lot or nearly as much as they are if we had a farm system, if we had the ability to develop within the farm system. There are some players that you can be excited about. Trey Savage looks like he can be a very good baseball player. Jake Bloss, who is going to be a guy that maybe even comes in this year to help the Toronto Blue Jays. Orelvis Martinez, coming off of obviously that suspension, could have a role on this team. Will Wagner, we saw flashes from him that he could have a good season. Joey Loperfido might have to be a guy that we rely on in the outfield. So there are pieces in this farm system that can help the Toronto Blue Jays. But when you compare it to the rest of the league, I think on the MLB pipeline, they have them at number 23 in the prospect rankings in the league. That's not exactly where you want to be. And we talked about with all the money, if you can get guys that are younger on pre-arb and arbitration contracts, you don't have to pay them nearly as much. And then the luxury tax wouldn't even be a problem if we had younger guys that were developing and coming up to the major league system or the major league team with the Toronto Blue Jays.
That's right. And it all stems back to that. The fact that, there are different ways to go about this and spending and how much they want to spend, where their cap is in their own heads. You could develop players. You could try for different draft picks, but they want to be a team like the Yankees who go out and buy guys, but it's not working. So something has to change. And I think that all stems from this front office and the change in leadership there. And we'll have to wait and see over the next little bit here. I guess after this season, if this season goes poorly, we're gonna need a change. And I think everybody in their right mind understands that. So we'll see, Carter. I mean, it's just it is just a tough thing to talk about with the whole money thing because there's so many different components that go into every little decision. There are clauses in every part of the CBA. There are little things that can change things in an instant. So you can't the thing you see probably has 4 other things behind it that contradict this and that and the other thing. So it is what it is. It's not our money. We want our team to be good. We're not out here trying to make Rogers money. We're just trying to enjoy baseball. So hopefully we can enjoy some baseball.
And you see success both ways in the league. You've seen the Los Angeles Dodgers and New York Yankees go out and pay all these big free agents, but you've seen the Washington Nationals, you've seen the Kansas City Royals, not the biggest market teams, develop from within and go and win a World Series as well. So you can do it either way. It's just you either kind of have to go all in on one way or go in all in on the other way. Of course, you'd want it to kind of be a mixture of both. You want younger guys and you also want the vets to complement that. the Toronto Blue Jays are trending that isn't exactly the direction that they are going. So I guess at the end of the day, we just got to hope that the Toronto Blue Jays can make some signings. We got to hope that a lot of the Toronto Blue Jays have better seasons than they did in 2024, and they can all progress and just be better. That's at the end of the day, it's got to be better than 2024, because 2024 is not going to cut it, us being in 2025 now. Hopefully, looking at only positive things ahead, hopefully get a lot of jumps in careers from some of these Toronto Blue Jays players that we all know and love. I just want to say thank you guys for watching, the likes, comments, subscriptions. All the support recently has been much appreciated. Again, on that Monday episode, I think we had 120 comments to go through. So that was a good time. I spent about half an hour just, responding to some people, having some laughs at some other ones. Again, there was some comments at us, some positives, some negatives. I love them all. I got a good chuckle from a lot of these comments. We just like the interaction from you guys to see how you guys are feeling about this current Toronto Blue Jays team, what you think should be done to, improve on this team for 2025. And hopefully this Toronto Blue Jays, I think all of us can agree on this. We all want the Toronto Blue Jays to be successful for this upcoming season. But Braden, you got anything else to add before we do take off for the weekend?
No, it would be the best 2025 year if the Blue Jays can just be okay. I just, maybe slip into a playoff spot, maybe win a game, maybe a series, maybe the World Series. I mean, it would be awesome. So let's just hope for that. I'm going to be delusional this year and just think that this is the best team ever designed, no matter what it is, because I'm a delusional fan.
Yeah, I got one more thing, and I got a perfect goal for 2025. Toronto Blue Jays goal. The season is complete if we win a game against the Miami Marlins. Thank you guys for watching. We'll talk to you guys on Monday.